Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Believe in Hawks episode. As we continue through this offseason, we are now entering kind of the NBA Finals phase, one last series to wrap up, and that means we're moving closer to the draft, free agency, and everything under the sun. And obviously, that means more conversation about our Atlanta Hawks. And today, I wanted to bring on Wes Morton, the managing editor of Peachtree Hoops. You may have seen his articles, read his articles. He's been covering the team for a few years now, and wanted to bring him on, and give him share some of that wisdom with us on the pods today, man. But Wes, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, sir, man. We talked before. It's been about almost a year since you've been on. And obviously that means we've gone through a whole year, since the last time we talked and the season happened. I know it's been a while now, but I guess seeing how things have played out in the playoffs and seeing where we're almost at the draft, how do you feel about, I guess, the Hawks right now? Obviously, we don't have a president. Don't know if we're going to get a president. We'll see if that happens. And then, obviously, there's some big decisions they got to make with the roster. So how are you feeling right now just overall about the Atlanta Hawks?
I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but I mean, I feel you got to feel pretty good about them. Like I said, the president thing is kind of interesting because, when it first dropped, like nobody was really expecting them to let go of Landry Fields, and they kind of put out a press like release where they said, "Hey, we want a guy who's experienced, who's been at the top level." They've been trying to get reportedly try to get Bob Myers, who was obviously with the Warriors for a long time, and getting a conversation with some of these other guys. And it's been like a month and a half or so. They hired a search firm. They promoted on Sala. So you would have thought they would have got it done within a few weeks, just based on what they wanted to do, what they seemingly wanted to do, so they could kind of have them in for the draft cycle. But the fact that they've gone this long is kind of like saying that they really want to aim high. Like they don't want to just settle for a guy. They may even just like not fill the position because the position hadn't really been filled since Travis Fink left. So and maybe just let Onsi Sala run the show. So I mean, other than that, like I said, if you look around the playoffs, we were talking right before this, like, the Eastern Conference definitely went differently in the playoffs than I think I and most everyone else believe. Like, I thought, I definitely thought it was going to be, Boston, Cleveland, Eastern Conference Finals, like no matter what, just about. But obviously those teams had like injuries and everything else, and, credit to the Pacers and the Knicks. But I think it shows that, honestly, the Hawks aren't that far off. Like, I mean, they were kind of on like a top 6 trajectory when Jalen Johnson was healthy. Their core is really young. I feel like they actually kind of play kind of similarly to the Pacers, maybe not quite to that extreme of pace or whatever, but they've got and getting like Dyson and Zac, they got like two real strong two-way wings. But the core is young, it's definitely young. This past season was getting Dyson, getting Zac, another step up for Jalen. Even Okongwu moving into the starting lineup, like they kind of realized they had to take a step back, after the kind of DeJounte, Trae Young era, take a step back, get younger, focus a little bit on development. But, it sounds like they're ready to kind of like step forward again. They added some veterans at the trade deadline, of course, but they may try to add a couple more. And, the big thing is, I think, getting Trae Young to kind of like, I guess, extend or at least buy in for the future. Figure out, what's going on there. He's eligible to be extended after this year. But yeah, man, I feel like if they keep this together, like the East is just wide open. Like you've got, like we said, the Pacers, the Knicks, the Celtics are unfortunately going to be without Tatum all of next year. Cleveland's going to be Cleveland's going to, they have to shake up their core just based on the fact they're just financially like way into like the second apron. Detroit's right there, but if they're able to get a healthy year out of Jalen, get this core together, kind of maybe rebuild the bench. They got the 2 first-round picks. I think you got to feel like they're in a better place than they were 12 months ago. I would have to say after, like I said, the most improved player in Dyson, second runner-up rookie of the year in Zac. Like you would rather just be young and have some promise than just being like, the teams they had prior, they had kind of reached the ceiling that they were ever going to get to. So obviously it was just time to move on for DeJounte. They looked like they're moving on from Clint, moved on from DeAndre Hunter. So I think they realized that. And yeah, I mean, I do think you got to feel good. You got to kind of maintain what they're doing, and we'll kind of see what this offseason brings.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, the CBA has changed so much for teams. I think I forgot who said it, but they said the two teams, if the Pacers make it, both teams will be under, I believe, the aprons going for the NBA Finals this year. And so people are kind of like, we've been so adamant about you got to spend to win. And now the CBA has kind of shaped the league where it's like you could spend, but like because there's so much more parity, it's trying to spread out talent more. Maybe you don't have to if you just make the right draft picks, you hit on your picks, get some guys who develop through the system, and now all of a sudden you have a team and you didn't have to maybe spend a ton of money, which I think is what some people are having to kind of change their thinking on how you build teams in nowadays. And one thing for the Hawks, I think, is because of the fact the East is so wide open, so many people have just been like the Hawks need to go all in. They need to be aggressive. They need to do something. And I think everybody agrees, yes, there are moves to be made. The question is, what type of moves are there to be made? Is it the big star? Is it just retooling and just adding key pieces, maybe key veterans? You've kind of mentioned that you kind of feel like with the core, you feel like there's promise there. So it sounds like you're leaning more, hey, let's keep working with the core and let's keep growing from there. If going into this offseason, what would you like to see them do? You don't have to give particular players unless you have some in mind, but what would you like to see them do if they were to continue to build around this core?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just the depth. Like you said, you kind of mentioned, OKC, Indiana. Like, obviously those teams are, they got strong starting lineups, but those teams can go. They've been going 11, 12 deep in the playoffs, and like it's nothing. Guys kind of rotate in, so they've gotten guys kind of in their own system, in their system, and built them up. And like you say, with the CBA, like you want to avoid the second apron because it limits your flexibility to like do stuff. And I think Boston and Cleveland are both going to try to get out of the second apron as much as they can. So for the Hawks, like I said, they're they got plenty of room right now. But the biggest thing is just, like I said, I think the biggest thing was using the 2 first-round picks, probably get those guys in, get them in your system, develop them. You've got other guys. Mo Gay came on strong last year. Like if the Hawks can get to the point where they're 11, 12 deep, 12 guys they can trust in a playoff series, like, that seems like to be the key in today's NBA. Like, Indiana and OKC are both super high, fast-paced teams. They got, tons of like long perimeter players, like just being able to, cycle guys in and out. I think that's where the Hawks got to get to, which, I mean, like I said, I think their starting lineup is shaping out well. I think their depth kind of let them down towards the end of last. They obviously picked up guys from even in Los Angeles, but we'll see what they do with that. But just reshaping the bench, getting guys used to playing at like the fast pace up and down kind of game. That I think can take the Hawks to the next level without, like I said, without even trying to make like a major move. Obviously, like we hear a lot of stuff about some of the big stars may or may not be available. The Giannis is the league, but I don't think the Hawks necessarily need to shove their chips all in for one guy. If they can just, like I said, get 12 deep, get a solid bench, that I think is the direction that they need to go this offseason.
Yeah, and I think too, I want to touch on what you mentioned about the draft and maybe the 2 first-round picks. Obviously, they have the 13th and 22nd pick in this year's draft. It's coming up in just a few weeks. Hawks have been going, scouting, evaluating some guys. I just wanted to ask you, is there a person or people at 13, let's start there, that you think in this year's draft the Hawks should highly consider or you think would be a really good fit with this team?
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot. It's kind of hard to kind of project who's truly going to be there or not. I'm kind of looking at, it's possible that Derek Queen could slide all the way down. He's just super skilled. He's got a great passer. He's got a great feel for the game. 6'10", I think the biggest issue is kind of his conditioning and his
Mhm.
like, maybe slightly undersized, but that's similar to like, Okongwu. I think he makes up for it in other ways. He's still, rebounding and does a lot of big man stuff. But there's talk he was kind of projected to go like mid lottery. He might be
Mhm.
sliding a bit after his combine. So if he's there at 13, I think the Hawks should probably snap him up. At the very least, they obviously need like a backup center. But he'd be interesting with like, with a Mo Gay or with a Jalen Johnson kind of a guy who's maybe a stronger defender down low to begin his career. Um, Another direction they could go. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the guy's name, but I think it's Maxime Reynaud.
Mhm.
Uh, Went to Stanford. He's like a 7'1", can shoot, kind of a big. Um, he'd be interesting to really like stretch the floor for the rest of the team. He's not super mobile or anything like that, but I think either of those guys would be a take at 13. Um, and then from there, like, at 22, I still think they need to address backup point guard. I think a guy like, Walter Clayton Jr. from Florida,
Mhm.
he can get buckets. Like, yeah, like the Hawks kind of just need a guy who can get buckets on the second team. They kind of had Karras in that role last year, but it'd be nice to get like a polished like college point guard, floor general, bucket getter at the one behind Trey Young. I think at 22 is always a good to get like a backup point guard because um, usually those like older kind of guys that kind of slide down there, guys who were in college for many years. So those would be guys I'm personally in on pretty high on. I'd be
Mhm.
targeting. Um, I don't. I wouldn't mind them getting like a wing, like a Carter Bryant, uh,
Mhm.
kind of 3-and-D kind of guy. Either like you said, these like I've said before, like these playoffs are showing like you really want to have like two-way wings as much as you can. Obviously, the Knicks went all in on Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby. If you can have 3, 4, 5 wings that you can cycle in and play their role, like that's just the modern NBA. So. Um, but I do think the Hawks need to probably come out with at least one big with one of their 2 first-round picks. Just at least not necessarily that he would be the backup 5, but he would be in like competition with maybe they go and get a vet 5 or something like that. Try to sort of thread the needle where you do want to take the best player available, but you also want to kind of like address like any need you have, and that's kind of like to me the biggest need that they have at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously there's been, people who are trying to figure out, what's the best big? Because it feels like a lot of bigs in this draft that may be available, some people think are going to be a little bit on the shorter side. So then people are like, is that really filling our issue with Okongwu being, I guess, on the shorter side? But then others are looking at the skill set that those guys bring and that, hey, the Hawks can do something with that. And so they're also kind of connect the dots in terms of, okay, we did bring them, what could improve? I know another name I think some people like to talk in is it Colin Murray Boyle? He's another name that I know people have mentioned as well. Like I said, shorter guy, but people think strong defender, can finish at the rim, and etc. Um, so obviously you've talked about some of the vets on the team. Karis Levert was traded for Terrence Mann, George Niang. Karis Levert is a free agent. Do you believe personally the Hawks should make a strong effort to bring back Karis Levert, or do you think they should be looking elsewhere when free agency begins?
I think they should, definitely look at they could definitely look at Levert. I mean, what he's able to do, like, come off the bench. Sometimes he would close as well with the regulars. Like, that's one thing that kind of lacked in the first half of the season. Like, they just didn't really have anyone who could really go out there and get his own shot. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think so. I think he fits his system. I think he's got a big frame. He's 6'5". He can guard like ones and twos and maybe threes. Like, um, and yeah, just having those guys just like when the offense gets bogged down to get the ball too late in the shot clock. Like, I think that's something the Hawks were just low on. It's not really. That's maybe a Dyson can eventually kind of get there. Um, in terms of getting a shot, getting a pull up shot late in the clock, but yeah, having like I said, having Levert, having maybe one other guy, maybe they look at free agency, possibly drafting a guy like I mentioned it with number 22. I think that's something that the Hawks were kind of lacking. Um, After trading DeJounte, I mean, for everything, the DeJounte area didn't work. The thing he did bring was, if Trey is injured, hurt, he can step into that role. He can, get his own shot, and he can kind of lead the offense. So after him, yeah, I mean, Levert kind of fills that need in a way, and he's already been in the system, and he's familiar with Coach Snyder. So yeah, I would definitely, at a reasonable price. I think he just turned 30 or 31 or something like that. Maybe something like a 1 or 2 year deal at like a reasonable 10 to 15 million price or whatever would I think be. I think that would be your first option before trying to look out elsewhere in free agency.
Yeah, and I think, listen, I've also been on board with running back Harris just because he helps fill that role. Someone, like I said, we saw at times at the end of games that they were kind of able to even use Trey off ball a little bit, just because Harris could handle the ball sometimes. So that's something I think if they could keep, I would think they'd want to with what they're trying to do. Speaking of Snyder, obviously he's a guy who a lot of Hawks fans have different various opinions on. Some people, think, he's had what he's had. He's had injuries. He's had some lackluster roster in terms of construction, and he's just done the best of what he can. Some feel like that for what we paid him, he hasn't reached the expectations as the coach so far. I just want to get your thoughts on your assessment of how Quinn has done going into his third full year with the team, and just, where do you stand on him? As I said, this year probably will be the first year, I guess, you're going to feel pressure to actually win some games in Atlanta.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a big thing because he's kind of had to do both on some level. Like he has to, obviously he wants to win games, and the Hawks have been, kind of right there, at least in the play-in. But at the same time, it's been pretty clear that the Hawks just haven't had enough. So, we kind of see it like, halfway through the season, they've kind of pivoted to making sure to get guys developed, getting guys, using, I think the biggest thing I'm, a backer of Quinn Snyder is how well he uses the Skyhawks. So like each of the last 2 years, basically he's taken one of his assistant coaches and they've become the head coach of the College Park Skyhawks. And you think about like the guys who've gone through there, like Vít Krejci he was there briefly. He got cut. He got brought back on like a 2-way, and then he earned like a full contract this past year. We've seen the growth that Mo Gay has had, working with the Skyhawks and then eventually coming up to the Hawks. And, that's, like I said before, with the depth, like that's being able to develop your own depth within, guys who are like second rounders is like huge, so that's the development part of it's been huge. Other than that, like I said, I mean, even Onyeka Okongwu, I need to bring him up, like him starting on the bench, and he wasn't, one big thing Quinn Snyder's been working with him is obviously him seeing the floor, making passes, and then stepping out and hitting threes. So we've seen in the last couple of years, where Okongwu has gotten to as, a legitimate 3-point threat. He's not, one of the best stretch bigs out there, but he can do it. Like if you leave him alone. Like I think he went 4 for 8 in that last play-in game. And so development of him, getting guys in, there's been a shuffling of the rosters. But there are definitely criticisms of Quinn. I think it just kind of starts with like the records. You feel like he should have won more games. But once you sort of take into context, like the injuries they've had, the shifting roster they've had over the past 2.5 years, really, or just all the things he's had to kind of deal with, I think it's too early to judge him on that. So, I'm still a big backer, and you can tell he still has a locker room. Like the players love him. Trae Young speaks about, how smart he is and all the insight he gives, and a lot of the players do too. Like, they can tell he's a really smart guy. Knows how to like pass along his message, and he's got a strong staff. But I am with you. This upcoming season is going to be big for him. Development is nice, but the results have to kind of show themselves on the basketball court. And with the president search, obviously, like that's coming from ownership. They're saying, hey, we want a guy who's established. The reason you would go after an established guy is because you really want to, turn the corner and start to compete. So, that obviously comes down on Quinn. Like, it's going to be big for him to, obviously try to win games, certainly get to the playoffs next year. Like that's going to be a goal. And, if he's not able to get to the playoffs next year, we can definitely have a conversation as to like, hey, maybe it's just, maybe it's not working out. But for the time being, with the injuries, with the shifting rosters, like I think he's done about as well as job as you're going to get out of, any other coach you would be able to bring into Atlanta right now.
Yeah, I think too, like you said, he's been dealt certain hands at times with the team over the last few years, and I think he's just worked with what he's had. It's not like he's had this amazing talent where you're like, oh, he's clearly underachieved. And I would think even before the season, some of the predictions that we saw, I mean, it seems like the team overachieved.
Right.
So, I mean, it's all about context. People sometimes will switch their expectations mid-season and then be like, well, he didn't reach the expectations I set mid-season, not the ones but he passed the ones you made preseason. So it just kind of depends on, who's viewing it from whose lens and just understanding what Quinn's doing. But obviously, like we said, he's facing a year where he has to win some games, right? And so big part of that, obviously, as we've mentioned multiple times already, is development. Recently we've seen Dyson back in the gym with Phil Handy, trying to work on his game. Obviously, Dyson's been very vocal about how he wants to, try to take pressure off Trey. He said that at the beginning of last year, and just trying to become a better overall player. And obviously, he's also eligible for an extension as well this offseason, which people think the Hawks will look into. Where are you at with Dyson? Obviously, we know he's the most improved player in the league, first team all defense. But where for you do you want to see Dyson really make his most growth at next year that you think will really benefit the team?
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think you said it. Like I said, him just being on the ball, like he's kind of at a point where he can obviously handle the ball. Like whenever Trey was out, when he was injured, and Trey only missed like 5 or 6 games last year, but if he was injured and Dyson was in, Dyson was basically playing the point guard role. He's carrying the ball up the court and attacking the defense, trying to get downhill. I think the biggest thing is to continue that, to make make better passes. I think he turned the ball over a little bit, too much. Run the offense. Like I said, he'll be a secondary guy next to Trey, but to be able to take over the parts of the offense when necessary. The other thing is just getting to his like 3-point shot, his pull-up shot. Like he was kind of someone who was, you sort of like was just a catch and shoot guy. Someone would have to kind of set him up to get him an open 3-point look. So if he can kind of work on getting to like a pull-up game, like getting some separation, shooting, a lot of his game has been predicated on just, getting downhill, getting drives, try to score near the bucket. He's obviously got a good like, flip shot or hook shot in the lane, but they do need a guy who can stretch the floor a little bit more than he can. So those to me are the biggest things. I mean, I think he's already obviously like incredible on defense, like second in defensive player of the year. He was first team all defense. He's obviously incredible with all the steals and everything like that. So I think most of that growth is going to be offensively, just really being that secondary guy, providing spacing off the ball, catching and shooting, pulling up and shooting. I want to say he averaged maybe 14 points a game. Maybe if he can get closer to 20 points a game on like even better efficiency from around the floor, like that's really all you need from a guy who's in most of his he's going to be a defense first guy just because he's just that incredible in defense, but you still want him to be a secondary offensive guy because he's got the ability to handle the ball. He's going to play the two, and yeah, you want to take, like you said, you want to take pressure off Trey as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously, like I said, that's the big next step for him. And I think, like even in the video we saw him just maybe working up on like a pull up. When you drive, so if they cut off, finishing for a floater, maybe you can pull up, stop, get the defense offset, and then boom, you take a shot there. So I think those are things that he obviously can improve at and just continue to work on his game all around. And he even said he thinks he can maybe even be in the running for most improved player again next year, which would be him taking another step. It's just like, man, and I think some people were asking during the season, like, could Dyson even get himself up into an all-star, almost level-ish player where you're like, hey, if he's a two-way guy who can give you 20 and guard your other team's best player, it's like, seems like the sky's ceiling could be for this guy. Now, another guy who's very important in that mix is Zachary Risacher, obviously the one draft pick for the Hawks last year. We saw the journey he had during the season, having to adjust to the talent, the game early, where it was rough, and then we saw as the season gone on, we saw the work he put in, after practice and everything, and you saw some of the fruits of that labor, some really big games. We saw flashes, a 30-point game here, a 30-point game there. I remember when he had 7 for 7, 4 for 4, 21 points against Cleveland in the first half. Like, we've seen stuff like that. And I think people are still trying to figure out what exactly is Risacher's ceiling. I wanted to get your thoughts on him and where you think his biggest leap can come next year. And just overall, what do you think Risacher can be for this team?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I've tried to think, I thought about it within the last year. It's to me, he's like a really unique player, like in terms of what he can be. I've compared him to like I think his best outcome would be like, a Sean Marion or a Nick Batum, where he's like he's not gonna be breaking down your defense with his handle, but like you want him to be like, obviously a great shooter, um, you know, he can screen, roll, rebound, pass. He can just do everything. He's going to be just your Swiss Army knife at some point. So, he's young. He just turned 20, I guess, whatever it was. I think the biggest areas for improvement are, just seeing the floor a little bit better. I think we saw some flashes of his like passing and everything. He had a couple like, behind the back passes between the legs sort of stuff, but you'd like to see that more. Like I said, I think that's going to be huge. When defenses start to like, trap Trey, he can get the ball and like short roll and find guys, I think he only had maybe like 1.5 assists a game. If he can get that to 2 or 3, just as like that, secondary connecting kind of passer, that'll be big. Obviously, just continue to shoot like he did in the second half of the year. He's already shown that, he can shoot from all over the arc and, catch and shoot. He's got like the high release and, just be consistent all year long. See if he can hit, 38%, 40% from 3. And I think also defensively, I think there's a lot of room for growth. I think there were some videos of him in the gym working out, him just getting stronger, just getting a stronger build. I think it's going to help him defensively with some matchups. So be able to slide to the floor a little bit more, get inside, rebound, work on the rebounding is sort of the big thing. And then on offense, being able to dribble, drive, and finishing, through contact. Those will be it. Like Zach has to basically, because he's not going to be an on-ball guy, because he's not going to break down the defense. Like you want him well-rounded, like every other aspect of basketball with. And I think he's obviously shown flashes on just about everything. His ability to, cut and shoot and, have high basketball IQ. But in order for him to be like I say, the kind of Nick Batum, Sean Marion sort of type, yeah, just be an elite glue guy and contribute in every single area. And, he's such a hard worker. Like, I think he'll get there. What the ceiling actually looks like. Like, I mean, I think he'd be, like your number 3 option on a really good team, that kind of thing. Like, play that Sean Marion role between, Nash and Amari kind of a deal. Yeah, I think within a few years, with his hard work, I think he'd get there.
Yeah, I know. Like I said, he puts in the work, and I think that's what you love to see from him. And just be interested to see how he comes back. I know people have said from what he started the season, what he ended the season, he did look bigger. But obviously, while you're also going through the season, you're also trying to maintain because you're burning so many calories playing basketball. So it's always really crucial during these periods of time when you don't have to play. I mean, you're playing basketball. I'm sure these guys are playing basketball, but not to the same level, obviously, when you do in the NBA. And then you can really start to develop out. I do want to ask you about this. We kind of talked this before we got on here about Onyeka Okongwu. A lot of people see the hype and are just like, he can't be it, And then a lot of people bring up Al Horford and say he was a 5 for Boston. He's short and they won a championship. So this illusion that you can't have, I guess, a non-7 foot big, isn't true. Like you can have a non-7 foot big and still be successful. We saw flashes, like you mentioned earlier, with some of the stuff he did. Just what do you think about him right now? Obviously, I know you're saying he's working on the 3-point shot, but are you a guy who's like, Okongwu's fine? We could still get a guy with size, but I think Okongwu is fine at the center position.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm probably higher than a lot of people, to be quite honest. Like, I was kind of pushing the like, I think it's time to see what we have. And after seeing what we had during the season, after moving in the starting lineup, like, just based on what he's played and his ability to like I said, shoot, score, he's still, despite his height, like he's still a great rebounder, decent shot blocker. But really, what you like is he's not a guy you can take. You would necessarily have to take out, in like a postseason rotation, like a guy who's just playing drop coverage the whole time. Sometimes teams will just, okay, we're going to go 5 out and try to shoot. Well, Okongwu's such a great perimeter defender that, that's kind of like, your matchup advantage at that point. If a guy who can still play the 5 and rebound and switch out to stretch 5s on the other end, like, that's you're kind of in the same vein as like, a Miles Turner. And not to say he's Draymond Green, but Draymond Green's, been able to do that his whole career. He's 6'6", 6'7". The Warriors won, 4 championships with him. I mean, of course, there's only one Draymond Green. I'm not saying Okongwu will ever be that, but if you focus in on the height and say, oh, well, he can't do that, he can't do this, it's like, but they're, like you bring up with Al Horford in Boston, like Porzingis really didn't even play that much last year because he was injured in the postseason. Like, Horford's 6'10". So, I think if you focus too much on the height and you haven't really paid attention to the kind of context of, what the last few years of NBA basketball have been, it's like we see examples of it all the time. I mean, even OKC, like, so they're running lineups where they have either like Dort or Jalen Williams at the 5, and they're both shorter than Okongwu. Like, if you have like a connected 5-man defense, that makes that center like more available to again switch out on the perimeter and hold his own and still get enough, rebounding and interior presence. That's the matchup advantage you want to have in these in these, this kind of modern NBA. So yeah, that's really why I've always been pushing to, hey, let's see what you have in Okongwu. Sometimes guys just can't really like handle it. Like sometimes guys get pushed around the smaller centers and you realize, okay, can't handle it. Maybe he's gonna move to a 4, or maybe he's just a backup. But really outside of a couple of matchups, I would say last year, obviously he's gonna struggle with the Jokic's of the world. In the past when Embiid has been healthy, like he struggled with him, but like most guys struggle with those guys, those huge 7-footers, like those huge skilled 7-footers. Like other than that, like I think Okongwu showed that he can step out, he can pass from the perimeter and hit guys on back cuts. He hit Dyson on a bunch of back cuts during the season. Hold his own on defense. Like I'm not saying he's some elite rim protector, but he does well enough. He switches out to the perimeter. He's still a very solid rebounder. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I guess the other thing is that he really didn't even play with Jalen. Like when he got moved to the starting lineup, Jalen got hurt like a week later. That was kind of when he hurt his shoulder. We haven't even seen, that 2-man combination, Jalen and Okongwu, has been solid throughout the years. Like if you look at like plus minus data and all those things, Jalen kind of like, I think it's a great pairing because Jalen's like a huge 6'9", like, athletic beast. Like those two down low managed to kind of make up the rebounding and the shot blocking, like that you would want to see just together as a pair. So yeah, that's, for me, I think he's very clearly like a top, he's a starting center. Like, I don't know, maybe top 20-ish starting center in the league. Like, and that's still good enough. He's being paid like maybe like a strong backup just because the extension he took was when he was still a backup. So you've got another like 3 years on his deal. You can bring in like a vet, bring in a guy who's, 7 foot and 7'5" wingspan if you're able to, just in case you have some matchups where you need a little bit more length. But I don't see anything that says, oh well, Okongwu just can't cut it at a certain level when when you look around the NBA. A lot of teams have the ability to play smaller when they need to. So Okongwu just kind of fits in that mold right there.
Yeah, too. And I think too, you even mentioned him and Jalen working out really well, and that's something I think the Hawks are also banking on. Those two just really playing well together. They both Okongwu as a starter averaged 10 rebounds, Jalen averaged 10. Like two guys who are not even 6'10 are averaging 10 rebounds. Like
Right.
let's not make it seem like they're just getting destroyed on the boards. And people also forget multiple times last year, Okongwu was the center, and then their four at times was Terrence Mann. So it's not like this man. That's why I've always said it was also a matter of if you just put more size around him, he'll be fine.
Right.
Now, if you just say, hey, we're going to put you against 2 7-footers, like I always remember the Houston game because that was the biggest game, I think, that story where they put out 2 7-foot lineup and Snyder could not trust anybody outside of Okongwu, could not trust the soul. Right. And the fact that he's trusting a guy who's not a 7-footer to compete against 7-footers because he knows he can play against 7-footers should tell you a lot about what they think of Onyeka Okongwu. So I think that, people are, like I said, it's going to be debate all year. Every game, I feel I'm worried he's going to get into John Collins territory. If you remember the last year of John, every good game, C, every bad game, C. So
sides on either side going at it.
Exactly, man. Like that's just what's going to turn into, man. But we'll have to see. And I think obviously it'll be interesting to see how he comes back. Obviously, he's improved his diet, was able to stay healthy especially once he got into the starting lineup too, which is big as well. So we're going to have to see how those guys continue to move along as our offseason continues to move along when we get closer to the draft. But Wes, I appreciate you, man, coming on to the pod for sure, man. Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. You can find me. Obviously, I managing editor of Peachtree Hoops, peachtreehoops.com. Please visit us. We'll be doing a lot of draft breakdowns of all the targets the Hawks could look at, as well as just covering all the news and working on some Atlanta Dream coverage as well. You can find me on X, on Twitter, formerly Twitter, at BlogHawk, BLOGHAWK. So connect with me and let's talk the Hawks.
Yes, sir, man. Yes, sir. So we'll obviously have to see what happens next. We'll see if anything else as the finals continues to go on happens, and we'll obviously keep an eye on the president's search for the Atlanta Hawks. But obviously, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment down below. Follow me on X at Bryce_2K as well for, if you want to talk Hawks with me and everything. And, I think that's about it. That's Wes. I'm Bryce. See you next time.